Circling back to our top story, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is reportedly weighing his resignation after his ruling coalition lost its majority in the upper house. He had earlier vowed to stay on, citing challenges facing Japan, including what he had called extremely critical trade talks with the US. A deal, though, has now been announced. President Donald Trump revealing a new 15% tariff rate for Japan on his Truth Social platform. That's a significant cut from the initial levy of 25%. And to delve deeper into the impact of the U.S. trade deals being made, we have Jared Mondschein, Director of Research, the United States Studies Center. He is in Sydney. And Mr. Mondschein, how would you characterize the broader strategic intent behind Donald Trump's twin trade deals with Japan and the Philippines?
I think if you look at the way that the United States has engaged in its in the economic realm in the region in Asia, especially in this administration, there's not been a lot of strategic coherence. In this era of strategic competition, there's a lot of bipartisan consensus in the United States for getting tough on China, but less so for getting tough on U.S. allies and partners like Japan and like the Philippines, and as well as Indonesia. I think those partners and allies are seen as integral to this era of strategic competition for the United States to win this era. So those tariffs that were announced, I think there's a lot of pushback in the strategic community in DC in particular, but also in allies, capitals around the world, saying you actually need these countries on side. So this, I think, is welcome in a lot of the strategic community. But again, what's important to note here is all we have right now is basically announcements. We don't have the details just yet. And on trade deals, the devil's in the details.
And despite that being just an announcement, do you see it as a recalibration of U.S. trade policy in the Asia-Pacific, or are they more about campaign optics in an election year, you think?
I don't see why it can't be a bit of both. You have to look at where the U.S. has been on Asia from a trade and investment perspective. And in many ways, the U.S. has been absent for some time. As much as Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was supposed to be sort of a rules-based economic alternative to the China-led economic order, you can't deny that the Obama administration was a bit slow in getting to that trade deal, and the Biden administration did not revive it. Instead, they basically brought about an economic framework, not even a trade deal. So the U.S. has been absent from an economic perspective in Asia for some time, but you have to admit that Donald Trump has accelerated to a certain point, and that also there are some political dimensions at home that perhaps make these foreign policy wins more of a priority for this administration than they would have been just a few weeks ago.
Now, we saw the Japanese auto stock surge on the news. What do you make of this market reaction, and how significant is the proposed 15% tariff reduction for Japan's auto sector?
The Japanese auto relationship with the United States is huge and should not be underestimated. The Japanese cars famously were not warmly welcomed by people like Donald Trump in the 1980s, but now they are integral to the U.S. Car fleet and the way that Americans like their cars. A lot of them like Japanese cars. And a big component of that is actually just how many of those Japanese auto manufacturers are now invested in manufacturing in the United States itself. But still, there is a huge trade exposure here of Japan to the United States. And so I think this is a sensitive point for Japan. And this could very well be a huge opportunity for them to sort of provide some ballast and stability to a pretty unwieldy economic relationship with the United States. But again, it's still too early to tell just what this looks like because there are a lot of details that are still forthcoming.
Indeed. Well, looking at the Philippines with the tariffs lowered to 19% for the Philippines, what kind of industries stand to gain most? And how does this shape the economic dependency dynamics with Washington?
Well, with the Philippines, what you have is a U.S. ally that speaks English and is seen as a major source of services and goods trade, particularly from a services perspective, in terms of skilled labor and in terms of lots of outsourcing of customer service centers. But then in terms of goods, you have more manufacturing in Japan as well. But again, I think ultimately with Japan, with Philippines, you have a major U.S. ally that the United States wants to keep in its orbit and does not want to see this ally become more economically interlinked with China. That is, in many ways, the broader goal here from many in Washington in particular.
Now, although you mentioned that the devil's in the details, these deals were announced via Truth Social. Does the lack of traditional diplomatic rollout affect how U.S. partners in Asia view the credibility or permanence of such agreements?
Very much so. Vietnam, for instance, just a few weeks ago, it was revealed in the media that Vietnam had thought it had a deal with the Trump administration and had worked the halls of power in Washington and gotten support for a trade deal with the administration. And then the president himself changed the terms of the agreement at the last minute. And if you look at the way that President Trump has talked about trade with Canada and Mexico, it would be easy to forget that the current trading agreement between those three countries, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, was actually negotiated by the first Trump administration. So there is a lot of unconventional issues going on with this administration. At the same time, as much as economically, the United States is really at the whim of what President Trump feels from day to day, I think from a security and military perspective, you have to admit that the U.S. is in many ways showing more continuity than not from one administration to the next.
All right, thanks for your insights. We've been speaking to Jared Mondschein, Director of Research at the United States Study Center. Thank you.